Hello friends. Today we will be discussing the powers and functions of the governor. If we could recollect our last lecture, then we all know that the executive power of the state is vested on the governor, who is empowered to exercise it either directly or through his officers subordinate to him. There is not one consistent way of exercising the powers and functions of the governor. In fact, the responsibilities of the governor are discharged sometimes on the aid and advice of his council of ministers headed by the chief minister, and at others at the discretion of the governor himself. In fact, the president and the governor, being the head of the executive, has powers which can be said to be analogous to a certain extent. However, unlike the president, the governor does not have any military or diplomatic powers. Now, the president, the functions and powers of the governor can be, for our convenience, can be divided into four broad categories. These are, namely, the executive power, the legislative power, the financial power, and the judicial power. Apart from these normal powers and functions of the governor, there are occasions when the governor is empowered to exercise his functions in his discretion. What is a discretionary power? Discretionary power actually implies that when the governor in certain circumstances can use his powers without the ministerial advice. In other words, the governor is empowered to exercise some of his functions in his discretion. That is, he will not be required to act in aid and advice of his council of ministers headed by the chief minister. However, today we will be discussing not only the discretionary powers, but we will be taking up the normal powers and functions of the governor in this lecture, while leaving out the discretionary powers as a topic for discussion in our next lecture. To start with, the first of the four categories of power that has been mentioned earlier happens to be the executive power. The executive powers of the governor are as follows. Firstly, the governor is the executive head of the state government. All executive authority of the state is vested in him, and he can exercise his functions either directly or through his officers subordinate to him. All executive actions of the state are carried on in his name. He makes rules for transaction of business of the government and for the allocation of duties of his ministers. Secondly, the governor appoints the chief minister, and on his advice he appoints the council of ministers. Thereby, the governor administers to them the oaths of office and secrecy and accepts their resignations as well. In fact, sometimes at situations, the governor may dismiss the minister, including the chief minister. Thirdly, the governor makes high appointments, like those of the Advocate General, Chairman, and members of the Public Service Commission. Here it must be noted that though the ministers and the Advocate General hold office during the pleasure of the governor, but the members of the State Public Service Commission cannot be removed by him. In fact, they can be removed only by the President on the report of the Supreme Court or on certain other disqualifications as being laid down in Article 317. Again, the governor has no power to appoint the judges of the High Court of the state. However, he is entitled to be consulted by the President with regard to the appointment of the judges of the High Court of the state. And this is in accordance with Article 217. Fourthly, the governor has the right to be kept informed regarding the administration of the state. It is a duty of the Chief Minister to give or to provide him with the necessary day-to-day administrative information of the state. He may call for any information from the Chief Minister in this connection. He can also require the Chief Minister to submit any individual minister's decision for consideration of the Council of Ministers. Fifthly, the governor has the right to submit a report to the President under Article 356. According to this report, the governor may state that a situation has arisen in which the administration of the state government cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. Under such a situation, the President may proclaim an emergency in the state. In other words, the governor, through his report, actually prepares the ground for imposition of President's rule. In case the President declares the state emergency, then the governor acts like an agent of the union government in running the administration of the state. Finally, the governor acts as a chancellor of all the universities of the state. We all know that, like the President, the governor is not an elected member of the legislature. Yet, he is an integral part of the state legislature. The powers that he exercises in the state legislature can be enumerated in the following way. Firstly, the governor summons and prorogues the session of the state legislature. He can even dissolve the state legislature at any point of time. Secondly, he may nominate a member of the Anglo-Indian community to the Legislative Assembly if he feels that they are not adequately represented in the state legislature. Not only that, the governor may nominate 1/6 members of the upper house, which is popularly known as the Vidhan Parishad. And these 1/6 members are to be nominated from amongst persons having special knowledge or are experts in the field of science, literature, art, social service, and so on. And this is in accordance with Article 171. Thirdly, on the advice of the Election Commission, the governor can decide on a matter relating to the disqualification of a member of the state legislature after his election. In fact, if only his election is being challenged by some of the voters of the state, then only the governor can take such a step on the advice of the Election Commission. Fourthly, the governor can address either house or both assembled together and may send messages to them for consideration. The first session of the state legislature after the general election and the first session of the new year actually begins with the inaugural lecture given or delivered by the governor in the assembly. Fifthly, the governor of the state has a veto power. Now, what is a veto power? We all know that the bills that are passed in the state legislature require the assent of the governor. So, all the bills of the state legislature is subjected to the governor's assent. He may give his assent, he may withhold it, or he may return it back to the assembly for reconsideration. But this is only in case of a non-money bill. We also know that it is also provided that the governor, if the bill is passed, sent to the governor for the second time, then the governor will have to give his assent. So, if the bill is readopted and passed from the legislature, sent to the governor, then the governor, with the recommendations of the governor or not, the governor is bound to give his assent. Sixthly, there are certain types of bills which the governor can reserve for consideration for the president. Such bills may be dealing with the compulsory acquisition of private property, being derogatory to the powers of the High Court, seeking imposition of tax on any item declared essential by the Act of the Parliament, or likely to be in conflict with some law of the Parliament covering a matter of concurrent jurisdiction, or any other bill likely to create conflict with the union government. Seventhly, in case the legislature is not in session, the governor may, on the basis of his own satisfaction, promulgate an ordinance to meet the requirements of the situation. The 42nd Amendment Act has made the governor's satisfaction immune from judicial scrutiny. The 44th Amendment Act has repealed it. Such an ordinance shall have the force of law and continue to remain in operation for at the most till 6 weeks after the reassembling of the state legislature. It may be annulled or withdrawn by the governor at any point of time. 2 points should be noted here in this consideration. Firstly, if one house of the state is in session and the other is not, then it will be taken as granted that the house is not in session and the governor may promulgate an ordinance. Secondly, he cannot promulgate an ordinance until and unless on a subject where previous sanction of the Parliament is required, or where he is required to reserve a bill for the consideration of the President. Finally, the annual reports of the various agencies like State Public Service Commission and Auditor General are submitted to him, that he causes to be laid before the legislature for consideration. So it is because of him that these important documents or reports of the various agencies are submitted or laid before the state legislature for consideration. Now let us scan through the financial powers of the governor. The financial powers of the governor for our convenience can be summed up in the following manner. Firstly, a money bill cannot be introduced in the state legislature without his prior recommendation. So a money bill, if it is to be introduced in the state legislature, first it requires the recommendations of the governor. Secondly, the contingency fund of the state is at his disposal and he can make advances out of it to meet an unforeseen expenditure pending its authorization by the state legislature. Thirdly, before the commencement of every financial year, he causes to be laid by the minister annual financial statement, which is also popularly known as the budget, before the legislature. No demand for grants or proposal for taxation can be made by a member of the House except by the ministers acting in the name of the governor. Apart from these three powers, the governor of the state also has certain judicial powers, just like the President of India. Like the President of the country, the governor of the state has the power of granting pardon to persons convicted by the courts of law or remitting or commuting their sentence. It is, however, required that the offence must come under a law relating to matters lying within the executive competence of the state government. It is worthwhile to note here that there exists a difference between the President's power of granting pardon to the convicts and the Governor's pardoning power. In fact, the power of the President under Article 72 happens to be much wider. The President has the exclusive power to grant pardon in cases where the person is convicted or where the person has a death sentence. Again, where a person is being punished by a court-martial, the President has the power to grant pardon to him. But in case of both the death sentences and the court-martial, the governor does not have any power to grant pardon. In fact, in the famous case of K.M. Nanavati versus State of Bombay, it was held by the Supreme Court that the power of the governor to suspend the sentence under Article 161 was subject to the rules made by the Supreme Court in regard to the appeals filed before it. The rules of the Supreme Court provide that when a matter is being considered by the Supreme Court, the accused must not be surrendered to his sentence. In such a case, it is not open to the governor to suspend the sentence. Finally, the governor enjoys personal immunity from all criminal and civil proceedings during his term of office. This is an interesting point. Article 361 gives personal immunity from legal action to the President and the governors. No court can compel the head of the state as well as the head of the nation to exercise any power or perform any duty or to desist from doing so. In fact, the protection seems to be much wider. It not only covers the official acts and omission, but it also shields acts done outside the Constitution. Any act that is purported to be done in pursuance of the Constitution is thereby protected. Thus, Article 361 is a complete bar to the impleading and issue of notice to the President and the Governor. They are not answerable to any court for the exercise of their powers. So, to conclude, we can say that a comprehensive survey of the powers and functions of the governor suggests that he is more or less a nominal head of the state.